And we are live. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Hello, all the humans. Welcome to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix Sunday Speaker event. Please hit the like button and subscribe to get more of our awesome content, or better yet, become a member of HSGP and volunteer for something that fills you with joy. Today, we have Abby Hafer with Everything You Know About Sex is Wrong, Part 1, The Gender Binary. Abby Hafer is an author, scientist, educator, and public speaker. Her book, Debunking Intelligent Design, The Not-So-Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not, became a #1 bestseller on Amazon in the category of theism. Abby is not averse to irony. Her second book, Darwin's Apostles, The Men Who Fought to Have Evolution Accepted, Their Times, and How the Battle Continues, co-written with Dr. David Orenstein, describes the scientists who came together during Darwin's time in order to get evolution accepted, the science they did, and the sometimes colorful techniques that they used for persuasion. Her public speaking is taking her all over the United States, and she has given many television and radio interviews, including appearing on NPR and WBAI. Her scientific career includes a doctorate in zoology from Oxford University, many research projects in psychology, and a stint monitoring a fish population. With that, please give a big HSGP welcome to Abby Hafer. Abby.
Hello there. Now, would you like me to just go straight into the talk at this point?
Yep.
All righty, so here we are. This will take a moment to transition. Pardon me a moment. So can everyone see my first slide?
Yep, we can see it and hear you well.
Okay, excellent. So in the beginning, it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I don't know if you heard that old bad excuse for homophobia when you were growing up, but I did. There's just one problem with that, and it's this. It's wrong in every possible way. It's stupid. There's absolutely nothing correct about that statement. So let's just start again, and I'll do it right this time. In the beginning, there was one sex, and it was female. An individual reproduced by growing a copy of herself and releasing that copy into the environment. This was certainly the case with the first self-copying molecule. Since life began with the first self-copying molecule, this means that females are the first original sex. Let that sink in for a while. In the beginning, it wasn't Adam and Eve. It was Eve. In the beginning, it wasn't this. It was this. Now, this is a picture of bacteria replicating, that is, copying themselves, and bacteria came along well after the first self-copying molecule. But individual molecules don't photograph very well, so I'm showing you bacteria because bacteria are still pretty ancient. So, Eve, that first self-copying organism, made copies of herself, and those copies made more copies, and more copies, and more copies. Sometimes those copies had mutations. So in biblical terms, Eve begat Eve, and Eve, and Eve, and Eve, and one of those Eves had a mutation, that is, a slight genetic change, and begat a line of Evelyns. Some of these mutated further and begat lines of Ediths and Ednas. Meanwhile, the Eves were still busy begetting more Eves, but some of those mutated and became Esmes and Esmeraldas. So the first family didn't look like this, but more like this. So females were really doing pretty well before males came along. Thank you very much. The problems began when Eve's daughters, Edith and Esmeralda, started competing with each other, and thus was the evolutionary arms race begun. The problem was made worse by the fact that Edith continued to mutate and got new advantages over Esmeralda. Meanwhile, poor Esmeralda didn't always mutate fast enough to keep up. Many lines of Esmeraldas were wiped out because of this, and that was the end of their evolutionary line. But then a mutation took place that allowed some Esmeraldas to swap genes with other members of the population, members who were not Esmeraldas. And this gene swapping saved the day. That's because some of these newly acquired genes allowed the new Esmeraldas to compete successfully with that pesky Edith. The new Esmeralda was no longer a pure Esmeralda, it was true, but by golly, she was alive. So the new, improved Esmeraldas got ahead in the evolutionary arms race. And it was good. And that, folks, is how sex was born. And it was good. According to evolutionary biologist W.D. Hamilton, one major benefit that sexual reproduction gives us is the ability to stay ahead of parasites. Parasites work by adapting very precisely to a very specific host species. The only potential hosts that are likely to survive are those that have the ability to mix their genetics quickly through sexual reproduction and spread beneficial mutations through the population quickly, also by sexual reproduction. Other biologists have also suggested that the gene exchange done by sexual reproduction also means that siblings are not exact copies of one another and are therefore less likely to compete directly with one another for survival. But one way or another, that's what males are for. Males are genetic mixers. They speed up evolutionary change. Since a male's genes can only survive by contributing to somebody else's reproduction, males have evolved a wide variety of mechanisms for trying to persuade a female to mate with them. There's showing off. Everybody knows about peacocks using their tails to show off and try to attract mates. But did you know about Technicolor vomit? Crustaceans called ostracods vomit luminous mucus in order to attract mates. Isn't that sexy? There's also showering females with gifts. Humans do this. But did you know that bowerbirds do this too? Here's a male bowerbird making a really showy nest in order to attract a female. Here's the finished product. There's also trapping females. Trapping isn't pretty, but evolution isn't pretty. There's growing longer penises than the competition. This is what barnacles do. Barnacles are stationary as adults, so getting sperm to the nearest female is a challenge for male barnacles. They also have to compete with each other over this. They are up to the challenge. Barnacles can grow penises up to 8 times the length of their own bodies. Barnacles have the longest penises in the world compared to their body length anyway. Remember this the next time that somebody brags about the size of theirs. So, I've explained why sexual reproduction is useful. Let's move on to the whole question of what is natural. The cartoon here, of course, depicts unnatural acts with a sheep. This brings up a really important point. People will spend a whole lot of time telling you what kind of sex is natural and what kind of sex is unnatural, according to them. But you have just learned that sexual reproduction exists as a means of genetic mixing. That's all it is. This genetic mixing does not require a specific set of gender or sexual characteristics. So I'm going to state a bunch of mistaken assumptions that people have about sex and gender, and then take a look at males and females throughout the animal kingdom. You will see how brilliantly creative evolution by natural selection can be and how diverse the results are in the animal kingdom. There's no one set of rules. Sexuality is a free-for-all. You will also begin to notice how many of these mistaken assumptions are based on some humans' wishful thinking, usually about what they would like to see in their own human society. So, mistaken assumption number 1. Evolution means that males will have no parental involvement and will give care and will leave care of the infants and children to females, right? Wrong. Here's just one example. Emus, those big flightless birds from Australia. Once the eggs are laid, the male emu is the one who takes care of the eggs and incubates them. Once the eggs hatch, the male raises the chicks. Mistaken assumption number 2. Evolution means that males will always be bigger than females and will dominate them, right? Wrong. Here is a picture of an anglerfish, which is actually a picture of 3 anglerfish. Male anglerfish are tiny compared to females. To continue their existence past a certain age, a male anglerfish must attach himself to a female and fuse his body with hers. This female anglerfish has 2 attached males. In the biological sciences, having different sexes of different sizes is called sexual dimorphism. You can tell that the people who invented this term were men, since the term sexual dimorphism is defined as males being bigger than females. When the females of a species are larger than the males, this is called reverse sexual dimorphism. In other words, human male biologists just assumed that males being bigger than females was the natural state of being. Mistaken assumption number 3. But males are at least always the ones with the Y chromosomes, right? Wrong. Birds. All birds. All male birds have 2 X chromosomes. It's the females who have the Y chromosomes. This is true for some male insects like moths and butterflies as well, and some crustaceans and some reptiles, including the huge lizards called Komodo dragons. It's called the ZW system instead of the XY system, but that's just to make it easier for people to talk about it. Mistaken assumption number 4. Females and males have separate bodies, right? Wrong. Many animals are hermaphrodites. That is, they have both male and female reproductive organs. Most snails are hermaphrodites. So are many jellyfish and many worms. Mistaken assumption number 5. But male input is always required for reproduction, right? No. Bonnethead sharks, black tip sharks, leopard sharks, zebra sharks, small white spotted bamboo sharks, many snakes, including boa constrictors, a brand new all-female species of crayfish and 50 species of lizards, including Komodo dragons, can all reproduce without males. Mistaken assumption number 6. But we always see pictures from the Bible of animals being saved from Noah's flood by going onto a boat 2 by 2. That's what's natural, right? 2 by 2, 1 female and 1 male, right? Wrong. First, many species have some male homosexual individuals. For instance, rams. Yes, rams, that very symbol of raging male horniness. Rams are male sheep, and about 8% of all rams form exclusively male-to-male pair bonds, forsaking all contact with female sheep. Some animals routinely practice lesbianism. For instance, this species of albatross has many same-sex female pairs who nest and raise chicks together. Some animals form trios, and some trios are for child rearing. For instance, these skuas. Skuas often nest as mixed-sex trios and raise chicks together. And some trios are for sex. This is a North Atlantic right whale. And this is a photograph of a female North Atlantic right whale having simultaneous sex with 2 males at once. And when I say simultaneous, I mean simultaneous. That, by the way, is an example of a multi-male breeding system, where each female may have many male partners. For something more biblical, there are also multi-female breeding systems. That is where one male may have many female partners. For instance, northern fur seals. This is a male northern fur seal with its many females, just like the Old Testament. But what about primates, our near relatives in the animal kingdom? Well, it turns out that our fellow primates have all different kinds of breeding systems. Here's a graph for you. This graph shows that some species of our fellow primates have multi-male breeding systems. Those are the solid dots on this graph. Some have multi-female breeding systems. Those are the open triangles. And some have monogamous breeding systems. Those are the open circles. As for humans, we are the little plus sign near the upper right. This graph, by the way, is a plot of testicle weight versus body weight in primates. Somebody checked to see if there was a correlation between that ratio and mating systems, but the results were not clear. You should know that homosexuality, lesbianism, and bisexuality are all found within non-human primates as well. Mistaken assumption number 7. But at least males are males and females are females, right? None of this cross-dressing or transsexual stuff, right? Wrong. Transsexual fish are common. First, barramundi. These fish transition from male to female. Most individuals mature as males. They become female after 1 or more spawning seasons. Therefore, most of the larger specimens are female. Second, blue gropers. These change from female to male. This is a blue groper female. That's correct. It's not blue. It's the males that are blue. Blue gropers are a type of wrasse. Wrasses are famous for changing their sex, usually female to male. All blue gropers begin life as females. This is a blue groper male. And this is how you get a blue groper male. Usually you will find only one or two male blue gropers in an area and a larger number of female gropers in the same area. Then, when the dominant male dies, the largest female grows, changes color and sex, and becomes the dominant male. Third, clownfish. These change from whatever to male or female. Yes, Nemo himself was gender fluid. Clownfish start life with no functioning gonads. They are neither sex. There is one breeding pair with a large female, a smaller male, and a bunch of non-sexual or sometimes male smaller individuals. If the female dies, then the male becomes the female. If the male dies, then the largest non-breeding fish becomes male. Fourth, dwarf hawkfish. These are even more gender fluid. Hawkfish live in harems, with one dominant male mating with several females. When it comes to sex change, the size of the harem is important. Listen carefully now, because the plot to this is worse than a soap opera. If a male hawkfish takes on too many females, then one of the largest females will change sex, become male, and take over half the harem. But if that new male hawkfish loses a few females to other harems and is challenged by a larger male, then it goes back to being female. That way it doesn't lose precious energy fighting a losing battle. So the ability to change sex in both directions maximizes an individual's ability to reproduce. So gender fluidity is the name of the game for many species. Mistaken assumption number 8. Okay, so it is clear that nature does not define sex roles, and it is clear that gender fluidity is real. But at least there are two sexes, right? I mean, at most 2, maybe 1.5 or 1, but 2 at most, right? Wrong again. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Tetrahymena thermophila, the organism with the most creative sex life that I know about. It has 7 sexes. You heard me, 7. No wonder it's one of my favorite organisms. This single-celled creature, which has been thoroughly studied by biologist Eduardo Arias, mostly reproduces without sex, dividing into 2 identical daughter cells. That's Eve begetting Eve again. But when food is scarce, the creature can opt for sexual reproduction, which, as I told you before, creates novel genetic combinations that may give daughter cells a better chance of surviving in a harsh environment. Such tough conditions also rewarded the creatures when they developed more sexes, because it gave them more mating opportunities. After all, if you only have 2 sexes, there's only a 50% chance that someone you meet will be of the right type. But with 7 different sexes, a creature's chance of meeting Miss Right or Mr. Right increases to about 85%. 85% is bigger than 50%, so 7 sexes wins. So Tetrahymena thermophila is the swingingest creature I know about. So I think I've done a pretty good job of destroying what is called the argument from nature. There is no such thing as an unnatural gender role. Anytime that a religion or anybody else says that non-heterosexual sex is wrong because it is unnatural, it is clear that they are making things up. It's clear that we should not make assumptions about naturalness or unnaturalness or any given gender role or gender fluidity. We cannot use the excuse of what is natural as an excuse for the bad treatment of women or men or anybody in the LGBT community. So let's move on to the supernatural. Let's talk about morality. The philosopher John Loftus has proposed what he calls the outsider test of faith. In this test, he says that people of all faiths should be as skeptical about the supernatural claims of their own faith as they are about the supernatural claims of other faiths. That is, if you are inside a faith, you should be as skeptical as you would be if you were outside it. For instance, let's suppose that you are skeptical about the ancient Greeks' claim that every day the god Helios harnesses his 4-horse chariot and so moves the sun across the sky. You think that the evidence for this is not very strong, even though many people who claimed to know about these things thought that it was true and wrote about it at the time. According to the outsider test of faith, if you are skeptical about Helios, then you should be equally skeptical about the claim that the Judeo-Christian God created Adam and Eve as the first humans. If there is no objective evidence for Adam and Eve that is better than the evidence for Helios and his 4-horse chariot, then you need to doubt the supernatural claims of your faith. That's the outsider test of faith. I wish to propose a new test, a test for morality. Think of it as being like an outsider test for morality. It is similar to the outsider test of faith. In this test, you must justify your moral code, but not use any claim of the supernatural in order to do so. Why? Because the evidence for your supernatural being is no better than the evidence for anybody else's supernatural being. If you won't believe in Helios, then nobody else is under any obligation to believe in your god or goddesses. So all claims of morality based on the sayings or commands of gods or goddesses, and all claims of morality based on holy books, all fail this test. If you can justify your morality without referring to the supernatural, then you have at least started on the road toward a good moral code. This outsider test of morality may also be called the non-supernatural test of morality. I think it's a good test. It's a tough test, but not an impossible one. And keep in mind that it is only the beginning of developing a good moral code. It's a necessary first step. Let's see how this works out based on examples from real life. First, from my home state of Massachusetts, the Salem witch trials. In these infamous cases, innocent people were put to death by the Puritans after having been convicted of witchcraft. These clearly fail the non-supernatural test of morality. Without reference to the supernatural, there is no case against the men and women who were hanged. So these convictions for witchcraft make no sense because they clearly fail the outsider test for morality. This is also interesting because there are two institutions that descend from the Puritan Church. They are the Congregational Church and the Unitarian Universalist Church. Neither of these institutions would dream of doing something so irrational and hateful today. This goes to show that it is a good idea for religions to revise their thinking from time to time. Sometimes religions like to claim that they deal in timeless truths, but actually all religions do revise their tenets from time to time. It's just that some religions are more honest about this than others. I have some personal interest in this case. Some of my ancestors were Puritans and were living in Salem at the time. Some of them were among the people who allowed this madness to happen. I am very glad that the faith and morality of my ancestors has been revised and improved. I do not consider our modern society to be less moral than that earlier one. I consider it to be more moral. Next, Jewish dietary laws. These pass the non-supernatural test of morality. Why? Because no harm is done. And if people wish to express their cultural affiliation in this way, then that is their choice. Following these laws because they are written in a holy book doesn't make someone a better person for following them, but it doesn't make them a worse one either. Next, helping the poor because your religion tells you to. This passes the non-supernatural test of morality. The action is good, and the motivation is, in this case, irrelevant. So now we get to recent history. On June 12, 2016, an armed man killed 49 people and wounded another 53 people in a terrorist attack on a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, called Pulse. The murderer claimed that he was inspired by the Islamic State. Is the Islamic State anti-gay? Why, yes, it is. What's more, during the months that led up to the shooting, the United States had been treated to a whole series of so-called bathroom bills. These bills require transsexual people to use the public bathrooms that match their original birth gender, regardless of their current gender identity. However, that's only the tip of the iceberg. For instance, in North Carolina's infamous bathroom bill, we heard about the trans people and bathrooms, but that bill also allowed employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. It allowed discrimination against LGBT customers, and it allowed discrimination against LGBT people in accommodations. And it said that no city or locality could enact laws preventing these types of discrimination. Although some Christians opposed these bathroom bills, many others supported this type of discrimination against LGBT people, and they did so in the name of their God. Here's a quote from one. I believe that God got it right in Genesis 5:2 when he made them male and female. If God didn't give you access to a male or female bathroom via your anatomy, neither should we give you access via ordinance or legislation, period. And that was spoken in the chamber of the North Carolina legislature in 2016. This guy in the slide is claiming to speak for God. He is also using a so-called holy book to justify his bigotry. This is just one example. And this was the political atmosphere in the United States just prior to the Pulse nightclub shooting. So we have Christians who claim to speak for a supernatural entity when they say that LGBT folks are bad. We have Islamists shooting people because of a so-called holy book that claims to speak for a supernatural entity. Here's a clue. Nobody can honestly speak for a supernatural entity. That includes the people who wrote the so-called holy books. If shooting someone is bad, then shooting someone is bad, period. If you try to excuse it by referring to a so-called holy book, it is still bad. A so-called holy book is no excuse for bad behavior. Any so-called word of God cannot be used morally to justify bad actions. But here is my most important point. Most people already accept the non-supernatural test of morality. Even most people who believe in the supernatural already accept the non-supernatural test of morality. How do I know this? Consider the Bible. In it, there are numerous references to slavery, to selling your children, to rape, and to genocide. The Bible does not condemn any of these heinous practices. The 10 Commandments are silent on all these subjects, with the exception of killing. However, even with killing, God tells the Israelites to kill all the Canaanites, every man, woman, and child. That is, God tells them to commit genocide, and they do. Then the Bible acts like that's okay because a supernatural being said that it was okay. Now you know why I don't trust the word of supernatural beings, and I especially don't trust the word of people who claim to speak for them. Most other people don't trust them either. Allow me to demonstrate this to you. If I ask a fundamentalist of any stripe if they would kill me if God told them to, the honest ones will say yes. They would kill me if God told them to. On the other hand, if God tells me to kill them, I won't do it. So my question to you is this: who would you rather sit next to on a public bus? You can see from this that we have already entered the world of the non-supernatural test of morality. We like the non-supernatural test of morality. The non-supernatural test of morality is what most people already use, whether they admit it or not. In addition, most people today would say that slavery, selling your children, rape, and genocide are all immoral, even though the Bible says that these things are all okay. Again, we have already entered the world of the non-supernatural test of morality, and it's a better world. In this better world, no one has any divine rights. Men don't have God-given dominion over women. Humans don't have God-given dominion over anything. We are responsible for figuring things out. Sex is a matter of informed consent. Marriage is acknowledged as a human invention. We recognize that sometimes bad luck is just bad luck. There is no divine justice. There is no karma. This life is the only one that matters. We must love and comfort each other. And finally, this planet and all its life is ours to protect. This is important. We can understand the consequences of our actions, and we must act that way. No God will save us. No God will save the planet. The earth and the living things on it are holy. That is, they are worthy of supreme respect, not because they are supernatural, but because they are life. And that is amazing and precious enough. Thank you.
That was amazing, Abby. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I loved it. That is the entire reason that I'm here and do this job.
That is great. I'm going to stop screen sharing now.
Okay.
And now I can see folks.
And thank you for challenging the status quo. I really appreciate your perspective and your response to this, and love the facts and the way that you put those forward in your presentation. It was amazing. I'm going to watch it again and recommend it to my friends.
Oh, very good. Yes, please do. Please do recommend it. Please do send videos around. I love it when people get to see it. Plus, it's just such fun stuff. I have a DPhil in zoology. I think zoology is wonderful. I think everybody should know about transsexual fish because they're just so cool. So, enjoy.
Yep, absolutely. So go ahead and raise your hands if you have any questions. I will get to you in a second. I do have one from YouTube. Why use the label female to describe asexual organisms like bacteria? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to acknowledge these organisms don't have gender, sex at all?
Well, that's usually the way they're described in the biological literature. On the other hand, interestingly, in the biological literature, it is also true that when cells replicate, the new cells are called daughter cells. And it is also true, so sort of linguistically, I think it makes sense, but it is also true that the only organisms that can self-replicate are female. Remember what I said about the sharks that can reproduce themselves without males, all those other animals that can reproduce themselves without males. There are no males that I'm aware of in either the plant or the animal or the fungal kingdoms that can there are no males that can replicate themselves, whereas there are quite a few females that can. So it seems to me that the self-replicating sex is the female sex. So that's the way I'm looking at it. It's a good question, though. It's a perfectly reasonable question.
Yep. Awesome. Roy, go ahead. You're up first, and then Brian.
I'm curious as to these early self-replicating cells. Where did they get their nourishment? This universe seems to be based on recycling, where everything gathers energy from something, and then it passes on, and something else uses that for energy and what have you. So, is it just sunlight that they absorb, or what?
Well, that's okay. Here's the thing. Photosynthesis, which is using sun energy ultimately, that did not come first so far as we can see. But there is what is called chemosynthesis, which is basically getting energy from breaking chemical bonds. This is how various organisms in deep sea vents actually wind up getting their energy. So I suspect it's likely that the early self-replicating molecules got their energy through chemosynthesis. But ultimately, there's this big, huge energy source in the sky. And so when photosynthesis came along, then that enabled, well, what we think of as plant life, but originally it was photosynthetic bacterial life. But of course, once you get that, you're creating a huge food source. And then at some point you can have organisms eating other organisms and this kind of thing. So originally it was probably chemosynthesis. But the biggie these days is, of course, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis lies at the very bottom of our food chain. You and I ultimately benefit from plants photosynthesizing, as you doubtless know.
Thank you.
Sure.
Brian AZ, you are up next, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Kind of a more of a comment, but like I really like the idea of unmasculizing like females and just call them fee
Huh.
and take out
Yeah,
the
I know.
male,
Yeah.
wo instead of woman. Like that would be so much more freeing and liberating.
Yeah, no, there's this whole business of, of females or women being defined as not male, woman and female and all of this kind of thing. And it would be nice if our language weren't like that. The question for somebody like me as a public speaker is not making people work too hard. And kind of concentrating on the biggest points. And you can see, obviously, I made some pretty big points here. So it's like, in principle, this would be great. In practice, it's going to take a long time to change the language.
That makes great sense. Yes, thank you.
All righty. We have a typed question from Steve and Teresa Trezizi. We recently saw a TED article that said no one knows how eels have sex. What is your take on that?
I don't know how eels have sex. Wow, I love that question. Now I'm going to have to read up on eels. What kind of eels? Are we talking freshwater eels or moray eels? I mean, there's different eels out there. We're not knowing. Freshwater eels. Oh, my goodness. I don't know. Okay, now I'm going to have to read about eel sex. That sounds like fun. So,
didn't expect
and
to have
if I
homework.
do, you never know. There may be a new talk coming out about eel sex.
Is that what part 2 is?
You never know. As I said, that's why I said part 1, because there are so many misconceptions about sex. I knew it couldn't all be done in one talk.
Yep, absolutely. Amy Schwartz, you are up.
Yeah, hi. This question isn't really about sex, but about gender.
Mm-hmm.
So what gives people the feeling that they're female or male, or none of the above, and they just accept what it is, versus feeling strongly that they're actually the opposite gender?
Well, I don't know what makes people feel that way. There's the argument that gender is a social construct. But on the other hand, there certainly are plenty of people who feel very deeply that they are one gender or the other, and sometimes not the one that they were assigned at birth. It's a little bit outside my own realm of experience, my gender identity and my, sex evident at birth went along with each other reasonably well. I argued a lot about women's roles in society, but that's a different matter. But all I can say is it is apparently a very, very strong feeling when people just feel they were born in the wrong body, but I can't really speak to it personally.
Do you think that people who feel they're in the wrong body feel that more strongly than people that don't question it?
I wouldn't be able to say. I'm not a mind reader, but but people who were sort of born in the right body have the advantage that we don't have to worry about it. It's not a big part of our lives. We just kind of go on living. Whereas I can see how if there was this huge mismatch in your life between how you identified and what you were forced to be in the rest of the world, that this would create very strong feelings.
Okay, that makes sense.
I don't know. Yeah. I would also suspect that, as with so many things, there is probably a spectrum. And so probably the cases that we hear about are the people where the feeling of identity is so strong that it overcomes social resistance and family resistance. And so these are the people we see coming out, are the people who feel it the most strongly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so next we have another one from YouTube. So it's clear that transgender serves a purpose in reproduction evolution for many organisms. What purpose does it serve in humans from a strictly biological sense?
I don't know that I could quite answer that. I think it's just something that happens. This is the thing about evolutionary biology. There's a whole lot of stuff that just happens. One way, the other way, whatever, it just happens. And there we are. One thing, just to sort of reiterate this point, in evolutionary biology, evolution does not produce optimal results. And it is not the result of planning ever, or optimizing or anything like that. Evolution just rolls forward, and that's what happens.
Okay. All right. Howard has a question. How do you counter arguments from trans-exclusionary radical feminists that trans women are encroaching on cis women's spaces in athletics, women's spaces, and the like?
It's a tricky one. It truly is. Because, of course, cis women have endured a lot of discrimination, and they have had to fight hard for their place in society. Though I would say where trans women are concerned, they're not exactly coming in at an advantage. It's tough being a trans woman. It's tough being a trans anybody. So I doubt that anybody does it for fun. As to the whole athletic thing, that's an interesting question. And what I have read is that trans women don't seem to actually be making a big difference in women's sports. On the other hand, I do remember reading one trans woman, tennis player, saying that if she had transitioned earlier, that it probably would have been an unfair advantage. So, I think that this is one where we're really just going to have to look at the results in society and see what happens. One thing about me, although obviously I talk a lot about evolutionary theory, over the years, I have become a committed experimentalist and observationalist. So when in doubt, my question is, show me the data. And in this case, the data aren't in, because the phenomenon of people becoming trans in large enough numbers for this to matter, or I should say being out and being trans, has only happened recently enough that we don't have the data. So we're going to have to wait on that one and see what happens.
Yep. I love that experimental perspective. Yeah. Show me the data. We can evaluate it from there.
Right.
So Sean Major asks, were prehistoric humans monogamous? Most primates are not. How and when did the practice of monogamy in humans originate?
With prehistoric humans, hard to say. I suspect that they had all kinds of different arrangements, but I don't know that. Monogamy, I don't know. I mean, it's the kind of thing where we are conscious beings. We could probably choose to be monogamous in small sort of like extended family groups, which is probably how most humans lived in prehistory, would have been in, a group of like 10 or 12 people, most of whom had some relationship to each other, or were maybe like two families living together. You probably had a pretty good idea of who was having sex with whom. And there was probably a fair amount of opinionating about whether that was a good idea or not. And I have read that, we tend to think of early humans as not having a culture, and that's a mistake. And so there may very well have been essentially political marriages where, someone from one hunting or fishing ground would marry someone from a different hunting and fishing ground so that those families could have access to the other hunting and fishing ground. So there were probably, as I said, political marriages like that. And, maybe those were expected to be monogamous. If we look at non non-Westernized sort of hunter-gatherer societies today, which may or may not be the best model. But if we look at them, you can see anything. You really can.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and raise your hand or type them into chat. Will you come back next year for part 2? I really thoroughly enjoyed this.
Well, I haven't written part 2 is the problem. It's just that I knew that I wasn't going to cover it all in one talk. So there may be a part 2 someday, but I don't know when.
Okay. All right.
But thank you very much. I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get Catherine up first. Catherine, go ahead, and then Roy, you're next.
Yeah, I was wondering if the general rule of sex, if there is one, is about the mixing of genes. Why do you think, at least for humans, why many of us still seek out sex or sexual partners when we can no longer pass our genes on?
Because sex is fun.
Okay. Well, I was trying to think, for men, it could be social status. For women, it might, or both.
Well, it's probably, yeah, I mean, that's just one, but I would say all of the above. Absolutely. A lot of people like having partners. They like living with people, whether for comfort or convenience or companionship or sex or love or any number of things. Raising kids together, whatever the case may be. And I mean, even when I say raising kids, raising grandkids, if you're beyond the age of reproduction, there are lots of reasons, and including pair bonding still. So sex still will create a pair bond between people, even if they're not going to reproduce anymore.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Roy, go ahead.
I was thinking that when it comes to early humans and, questioning, do they have these kind of activities that you're telling us about, wouldn't because the Bible forbids these things, wouldn't that be because they were doing these things? I mean, wouldn't that indicate
Yes.
that historically, people were doing these bad things?
Yeah.
So then they were forbidden.
Well, yeah, and I would not call the people in the age of the Bible as early humans. These were people who were writing things down. But yeah, my guess is that when lots of prohibitions are thrown up about something, it's usually because people are doing it.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Oh, there's a long one from Jennifer. All right. Okay, here we go.
All righty.
Talent, ability, and drive range hugely among all people in sports. All elite athletes have some sort of advantage. That's how it works. Trans people should participate with the gender they identify with. Also, what about trans men? As how to define exactly who is a woman? What about women with a lot of testosterone?
Oh, yeah.
Investigating these things is humiliating for the athlete and just wrong.
It's pretty tough. I agree. On the other hand, if you're not going to investigate at all, then, I mean, you're going to have, and indeed we do have, people taking all kinds of performance enhancing drugs, hormones or otherwise. And there are bad consequences to a lot of these drugs. And it's not just going to be a matter of elite athletes, because then the people who wish to become elite athletes will also be taking performance enhancing drugs. There are unfortunately high school athletes that take performance enhancing drugs, and who knows how it's going to affect them down the line. Although at this point, we already know how it affects them in many cases, and that is badly. So when it comes to elite sports, I think that unfortunately there's going to be a level of invasion prior to competition, because we have to try and make it fair, and we have to try to discourage practices that will lead to harm, and harm in younger people. Because as I said, if elite athletes do it, it will filter down to the lower levels as well. So now I'm trying to think, there was another question buried in there as well. So can you, I see Jennifer's hand raised. Come on, sure.
Okay, I was going to say, I'm not talking about people taking drugs to cheat. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but the thing is, some of the drugs to cheat are male or female hormones, usually male hormones like testosterone.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with drug testing. I'm talking about when they, there's a woman who's an exceptional athlete, and so they do gene testing on her, and they see that there's something different about her genetic code. There, the X's and the Y's, or she's a woman who produces a lot of testosterone, and there's the whole spectrum on that kind of thing. And I really don't think, if she identifies as a woman, then she should be able to compete with women. I'm not talking about cheating and taking drugs, and I don't think anybody's going to cheat by becoming transgender.
Well, but by the definition you've just given, why couldn't any man simply say, I identify as female, and start competing in the female categories of various events?
Yeah, everything's on a spectrum, so there's always that point that's hard. But I think we need to figure out a way to err not on the side of public international humiliation of women. It's never men.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe that's wrong. Maybe it is sometimes men.
Well, now I'm getting creative here for a moment, because I am imagining someone born female who transitions and then becomes a gymnast. For floor routines, women actually are better at it than men, because women have a lower center of gravity.
Yeah, and that's why I said, what about male transgender men?
Right.
And might they, in the different sports and the different gender identities, if they're kind of mixed up, maybe it'll all come out in the wash to some extent.
Yeah, well, and
women,
I don't know, but I do think that there's going to have to be some level of testing and some tough decisions made. Though I do know that there are genuine, honest to gosh, full and complete women, no question about it, who produce a lot of testosterone.
Right.
And they're good athletes.
Exactly.
And as you said, I think that is just a natural advantage.
Right.
Let them go with it.
Right. So I think we have to find some kind of humane way of keeping things fair. And what does fair mean? I mean, men seem to be a lot more worried about, I don't know. And actually men pretending to be women is pretty rare, and they're just con artists, and they get caught.
Right. But I mean, women taking testosterone can also, it can screw up their menstrual cycles and all kinds of things like that. So there are genuine problems that way. And I'm just going to tell one story because I follow sports. And this is just to kind of give you an idea, talking about elite athletes. You've probably heard of Alex Rodriguez, the baseball player. Good old A-Rod. Mm-hmm. Now, A-Rod was this fantastic baseball player. And I say this even though I am a Red Sox fan and he played for the Yankees. Okay, I just have to admit he was terrific. But the thing is, even somebody that amazingly talented, it turns out, took performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
So it's like, if he's going to take them, what chance do the rest of us have?
He wanted to break the record he broke.
What's that?
He wanted to break the record that he broke.
Right. But the point is, what chance do the rest of us have if people that gifted feel they have to take performance enhancing drugs?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about the idea that we should just have sports and they should be whoever is.
That's one of my,
Yeah.
that's,
Mhm.
yeah, that's the next idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. With that, I'd like to give it over to Brian and then Athena. Brian, you're up.
Well, thank you. With all your amazing research, what was, example or one thing you haven't shared with us that like was maybe changed your mind or was something noteworthy?
Well, I mean, I've shared with you a lot of the really cool stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I didn't throw at you in this one. I mean, I tend to kind of like to use the best examples in a talk. Well, I didn't get to tell you much about that one line that I kind of threw in there at the, just in passing. The brand new all-female species of crayfish.
Yes.
This is true. And this is, this is also useful if you ever have to argue with people about evolution, because evolution is happening right in front of us right now. I'll give you two examples. One of which is the obvious one that we're all living through, which is that I will not use bad words, the very, very bad virus that is causing so many troubles with us right now is busy mutating. That's what the Delta variant is. It's a mutation, okay? This is natural selection in action. Tell that to anybody who does not believe in evolution. So people often ask, but what about, why don't we see evolution now? Why do you always talk about the fossil record? Why do species stay the way they are now? Well, the answer is that one isn't. And we're all living with it. And for that matter, any new disease, I'll repeat that, any new disease is the result of evolution. A mutation takes place that in this case allowed the virus to jump from non-human animals to humans. And that little mutation was the nasty thing that set all this off. That was a very handy bit of evolution, a few changes in viral RNA, and we've got a worldwide pandemic on our hands. That's one example. But getting back to the other one that I briefly mentioned, there is a brand new, evolved during our lifetimes, brand new all-female species of crayfish. What happened was this. There's a certain variety of crayfish. There are many, but there's a certain one that is native to our southeast in the United States that it turns out is a popular aquarium pet. So people have them in their aquariums, and they are popular overseas in Europe. So here was this little crayfish variety living in aquariums in Europe. And I believe it was in Germany, this mutation took place. And what happened was that the resulting new species is identifiably bigger. I mean, it's like, 30 to 50% bigger than the original. And they are all female. So no males, no nothing. They just do parthenogenesis. They do self-replication. They are, for that reason, incredibly successful, because if you have one aquarium pet with that particular mutation, the next thing you know, you have 2 or 4 or 16 or 32. So they had to give them away. And then, of course, what happened was that people who had these aquarium pets that were multiplying out of control put them into nearby ponds and waterways. And so now we have these self-replicating female crayfish all over the world doing very nicely. Thank you very much. That's the thing about all-female species. They're basically very, very successful until they're not, because sexual reproduction really is handy for the old genetic mixing business, which is handy in the face of environmental challenges. I mean, you still get mutations in the female lines, but they're all going to be linear, this kind of thing. So in time, all female species don't tend to do very well. It tends to be the sexually reproducing species that have kind of the agility to be able to meet new environmental challenges, although very often the most successful ones are the ones that can do both. So they can maximize all female reproduction when times are good, but then do sexual reproduction when there are challenges. But there's this whole question of time, because I said over time, all female species tend not to do well. We don't know how much time. It could be 100,000 years before this all-female species winds up running into problems that it cannot surmount the way that it does. So who knows? It's actually an experiment that's running right now in front of our very eyes. But as I said, just keep this in mind. It's a useful talking point because it is evolution that has taken place, a brand new species that has come into existence in our lifetimes. And it's all female. So it's just kind of fun from a number of different angles.
That's a great way to throw things into people's faces about one man, one woman being the norm. I love that.
Oh, it just does so many things at once. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Athena, you're up.
Hi. Yeah. Well, enjoyed the talk. God, that was actually totally, I wasn't sure what to expect, but like you covered everything that I was like, holy shit. Anyway, yeah, that was pretty awesome. And yeah, I don't know. I wanted to talk about the whole thing with estrogen versus not, the trans issue, because since it came up, my own experiences is prior to transitioning, I could do 15 pull-ups. And now I can barely do one. Now this took over the course of years. Early on I was down to 7, and I was like, okay, that I can handle 7. I mean, a lot of guys can't even do 7, but now I can't even do 1. And I mean, I exercise all the time.
Okay.
But it's just something I've noticed. So we're talking about competition in athletics. My feeling is maybe it has a lot to do about how long it's been since the person transitioned, how old they were when they transitioned. I don't think it should be I'm not a supporter of blanket acceptance or blanket bans either. I think it depends a lot. I'm sorry, I don't have a question, but I just felt like people were talking about this, and since I've lived it.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Now I do have one question for you. How long ago was it that you could do 15 pull-ups?
It was about 10 years.
Okay, so not a huge amount of time ago. I'm simply asking because I hate to say it, but age has something to do with that too.
I wondered,
I used to be able to do 40 pull-ups. I was a rower in my 20s. I was wicked strong. And I don't think I can do a pull-up now. And I think that's just because I'm not rowing anymore. I'm still exercising. I do a lot of cycling and stuff like that, but I'm not exercising my upper body the way I used to.
Yeah, I mean, my exercise routine changed as well, and I'm sure that had an effect. I mean, there was time issues. I didn't want to spend an hour doing calisthenics, and so there could be some of that too. But I noticed early on when I hadn't changed very much, I did notice a drop in my ability to do that kind of stuff.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, fairly quickly. I mean, we're talking about within like a year or two, and so, I'm certain there's an effect. Frankly, I kind of miss testosterone. This doesn't mean I want to detransition, but it's useful stuff, It's nice to have around. So anyway.
Yeah.
That's
Well, this is really interesting. Thanks for passing on the information. I mean, obviously, it's an experience that I have never had, and you are uniquely positioned to speak to it.
Absolutely true. Thank you for contributing, Dina. So before we wrap up, Abby, are there any books, podcasts, radio shows you'd like to promote? And where can people find out more about you online?
Well, you mentioned my two books, The Not So Intelligent Designer, which is a ton of fun, and Darwin's Apostles, which is also a ton of fun. I recommend both of those. I'm actually going to, I have a website, but it's a work in progress right now. I have a YouTube channel, but it just has my anatomy and physiology lectures on it. You can watch them if you want to, but they're not going to be as much fun as these talks. But I'm going to actually make a request of you because I figure I'm talking to a bunch of people now. Maybe you can help me. I am involved in putting together an amicus brief, basically a friend of the court brief for the upcoming abortion case in the Supreme Court. I have teamed up with a lawyer from CSI or CFI, the secular organization. He's a terrific lawyer, and he's very, very interested in what I offered to contribute, which is, could we please talk about the science of gestation someplace? So, it's things like heartbeat laws make no sense because fetal heart tissue beats because it beats. End of discussion. I worked in a tissue lab one time. You take heart cells, you know what happens? If you have individual cells in a Petri dish, no organism attached, nothing. You know what heart cells do? They beat. It's what they do all by themselves. No nervous system, not even a live organism, just live cells. They beat. So a heartbeat is not a sign of anything other than the fact that the heart cells themselves are alive. It means you have live cells. Cool. The whole unborn persons idea makes it sound as though the only thing that matters is conception, and then magically a baby pops out. And it's like there's this whole period of gestation that is being willfully ignored during that time. And unborn persons is not a correct designation because it ignores the fact that your physiological state changes over time. So physiological processes take time. Time exists. And it's kind of a shame I have to tell that to the Supreme Court, but somebody needs to. So for instance, it would be just as accurate to call you, Ron Russell, an undead corpse. Because given enough time, given those physiological processes, it's what you're going to become. But we treat corpses and live people differently. We do not feed a corpse. I'm sure you would appreciate it if I did not bury you now. So, as I said, time matters in physiology. Anyway, what I'm getting at is these are arguments that have not been made, that should be made. It's what I'm doing, but this is just going to be a brief made by me and this very nice secular group. But it would be nice if we could find journalists to talk about it, because there are lots of other briefs that are less good that have been talked about in USA Today and places like that. So they're going to be in front of the eyes of the public. There will be public pressure perhaps brought to bear as a result. The justices are going to read those opinion pieces as well. And frankly, a lot of them are stupid. And I want our arguments, the kinds of things I've just been talking about, to get into the public press as well, because if we get interviewed or if there are articles written about our brief, more people will talk about it. The justices might see it. There might be some pressure. brought to bear. So as I said, I'm just going to put in a request of, it's like, rather than visit my website, if you can think of a journalist or a, if you can think of a journalist or a TV personality or a radio presenter or a, I mean, I'm doing podcasts, but, you know, podcasters, basically anybody who has the ears or eyes of the world, I would really appreciate being introduced to them, because we are going to need all the help we can get in ventilating, in getting a big megaphone for this particular set of arguments.
Well, we certainly have people who are tied in with different communities and are active and engaged with that particular topic. So if anyone is interested in gaining Abby's contact information, reach out to me and I will provide it to you. And I would love to see and help out with that discussion or opinion piece in any way that I can. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the perfect way to do it. Yes, please contact Ron. Ron will connect us, and I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent, excellent. Chet, we're going to wait till after we stop the stream for your last question. With that, I wish to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you, Abby, for bringing this to us. It was an amazing presentation and one that I am very happy to be a part of. As always, if you enjoyed our content, then please hit the subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon, or better yet, become a member of HSGP and make the magic happen. With that, be well, stay safe, and goodbye, HSGP.